Going Global with Nearpod and Project-Based Learning.
But she's like, and then a guy came back here. And was trying to move over to the She did actually receive that. And I met with them. I know. This is within the air.
A lot of times I'll do the front loading kind of thing where I will teach a little bit good, and then put it on really big, and then let them kind of work it out on their own, and then use that as basis, like kind of moving forward. And that has worked. I haven't heard in the past. Because then you can kind of see, like, as they're creating with it, what's working, okay with it, and see what they're doing. So that's one. There's some cool things.
Going Global with Nearpod and Project-Based Learning. Today's your first day, then maybe you haven't heard this announcement yet, but before we begin, please make sure your cell phone ringer is off. Fire regulations require that all session attendees have a chair. There is no standing in aisles or sitting on the floor. Please do not use chairs for your belongings if others are looking for a place to sit. If you're plugging devices into wall outlets, please keep in mind that people may be moving around. During the session, your device may be damaged if someone runs into the courts. Act 48 will be available at P&C, as we have offered in the past. However, no codes will be distributed this year. You will be able to submit your Act 48 credit online via the evaluation process. And you can find the links in the Attendee Service Center on the P&C webpage. Or I have a link, you can see me after the presentation. So with that, now I present Mrs. Rochelle Hope.
Thanks. So is this on, or can you hear me okay? Mm-hmm. All right. So thank you for coming. I'm sorry that I was rushing to get here. I just finished a session downstairs, and it was not a quick walk. So I'm excited to talk about this because project-based learning, how many of you do project-based learning? Okay. Have you always been doing project-based learning, or were you at some point doing learning based on projects? Because that's what I was doing, and I thought, like, for years, people said, oh, do you do project-based learning? Oh, yeah. Because my understanding of it was just projects. Like, I didn't know the difference. And so over the past, this is the third year now that we're doing this. The past couple of years, I've tried to, like, move toward authentic PBL. And so in this session, I'll tell you about how we kind of went through the basic of project-based learning, got started, some of the challenges, the resources that I found that were most helpful, and then the ways that we kind of connected with students in other countries like Argentina, Spain, and Mexico which is completely amazing. Like, how many of you took a foreign language in high school? How many of you had a pen pal? Anybody get pen pals? Did you do it like the old school way where you wrote the letter and you had to wait for like weeks for it to actually get somewhere? Well, now, like, with technology, I mean, you know, you can be looking at your screen in a Google document here, and somebody the whole way across the world is looking at the same document and removing your text. That happened to you? It's amazing what technology does. And in my class, being able to connect my students with other students that speak Spanish around the world has just taken it to a whole new level, like for them and for me. So a couple of years ago, let's move to this next one. And I've been teaching at my school, which is near Pittsburgh, for 22 years. I've taught French, Spanish, and I teach an 8th grade course in STEAM where I teach a lot of different topics, technology, you name it. So I have a nice variety. So doing things like this with students, like the last couple of years, I've seen so many benefits of giving students more choices in the classroom, which I thought I was doing a pretty good job of when I was doing what I thought was the PBL, which was, here's a project, pick any of these tools to use to create your project, and then that's it. And I thought I was giving them enough choice and voice in what they were doing. But I realized after reading a book a couple of years ago that like I totally was not doing the PBL I thought. And so I made it a point to kind of change it to see what kind of a difference it would make for students. And so the main difference is like you're giving students an opportunity to have like a more authentic experience. Being able to study, like whenever I ask them, like what are you interested in? Like when they're like, I don't know. I said, well, if you could study anything, what would it be? And a lot of times they'll say like sports or fashion or foods or holidays. And sometimes some of the students are really interested in like different activities where they're learning, you know, about the world and the environment. And so there's like a mix of foods and then like these really deep, complex topics. But I always want them, at least for me, to tie it back into Spanish and the language somehow. But giving them that choice of like what to do is uncomfortable, I think, for me and for them. Because at first they're like, well, what do I create when I'm done? I said, well, you'll figure that out as you go. And say, well, I want to make a PowerPoint, or I want to make a Bunsy, or I want to just talk. Can I do that? And I said, well, yeah, but don't think about like the product, the end product first, because that's like, and I've made up this analogy, whether it's a good one or not, but that's like walking into like the card store or Target. Do you ever see like all the wrapping paper in the bags and stuff? Like everybody like, wow, those are awesome. Like imagine buying like the cutest box or bag, and then buying the gift for somebody, and it's like, you get this big gift, and you have this little package. Like, how are you gonna make it fit? So I told him, don't think about the end, like think about the process from now going through, and it should come to you. Whether or not I was making that part up, probably partially, but I was hoping that like they would focus more on like the learning and that experience as opposed to what do I have to create, because that was like a finite point that I thought they would have. So what I've noticed is like you have students who have these really authentic experiences, and you can feel it. When they present, you can feel that like it meant something to them. Like they weren't just reading from the screen. Sorry, and they didn't actually have to even look at the screen. And so whenever we did this, and I'll show you the steps that we took, I was amazed because there's no way with all of the resources that I have that I could have given them that same experience. Having the students teach about different things they were interested in, like not only gave them like that connection to the real world, but it also gave them that connection like to their peers to see what they were interested in. And so what started to happen, like there were all these other benefits that happened in addition to like the learning and having them connected to something in Spanish. Like one student said, well, what if I want to study like wrestling or fighting or any of these things? I said, well, just find a way to connect to the language. Like, how do they handle those types of activities? Like, is there like, do audiences go to people, is the public crazy to go see these kind of things? Like, how can you make a connection and then build from there? So, the first step, and when I first started, before I started the PBL, this was my classroom. Anybody's classroom look like this? I was very, like, I taught how I had been taught, which right now, like I'm talking to you, you're all sitting in rows, I'm in the front, I'm talking at you, and that's how it was. And the problem was, it was focused on me. I felt like I had to talk the whole time and provide all of the learning, be the teacher the whole time. And if a student in the back would ask a question, then I really couldn't get to them because I had to walk the whole way around the room. Or if a student in the front would ask a question, like the students around the rest of the parts of the room would kind of like, start talking side by side, and I would lose them. And so I noticed that there was like a big problem happening is that I wasn't able to give enough of like an interaction with me and the students. And so I got rid of those rows one morning, and that's kind of like where I started doing all of these changes. And so about 3 summers ago, I read the book Launch by A.J. Giuliani and John Spencer. Has anybody read it? Okay, so there's a quote in there, and it says, if you assign a project and you give back 30 of the same thing, it's not a project, it's a recipe. And I read that and I thought, wow, that's what I had been doing. So for years I was assigning like a family project or a foods menu project for my students and giving them the like requirements, the guidelines, it had to be on this paper or this size font or whatever it was, and getting back almost all the same thing with the exception of times where there was like glitter or something happened or a big poster board. Which those times, even though they weren't exactly what I wanted, it showed me about the students. And so I was able to like make a connection with them and just learn about them. Because I think it's so unique when you have students create their own project how they want to, as opposed to telling them exactly how to do it, because you learn about them. Like the relationships are so important, and that's not something I always knew. I just thought I had to do my way, this is what I want, this is the package I want it to come in, and then we move on, like the project's done. But doing this, I've seen that you can then use them and recycle them for other classes, for other students. They become teachable or tools for instruction that you can use in other classes later on, or that students can use as like evidence of work they did in your class for moving forward. So with Authentic PBL, and has anybody referred to the Buck Institute? Because now it's like the PBL works, but that's where I went first to find out like what exactly is project-based learning. And they had the essential elements, which I studied, I took notes, and then I think one of the first couple of days of school, that first year, I sat down with my students in class and I explained to them what we were going to be doing, which was PBL, and then I explained the different parts, and I had them write some notes because I wanted to do it right. I printed out the different rubrics and guidelines from their website, shared it with the students, because I didn't want to just say, we're doing this because I want to. I wanted them to kind of understand the process, so that when I went back, I said, okay, what's your essential question? And if they said, oh, it's how do they celebrate Christmas in France, for example? Trying to get them to distinguish between that versus like a real driving or essential question and know the difference. Like you can't just Google it, it's not a yes or no, you want to keep looking and searching, there's not necessarily one right answer, all of these parts. And so when I did that, this is what like the first round of projects kind of looked like, and I say projects, but what the students chose to create. And so I wanted them to tie it into something they were interested in. And any of you language teachers? All right, so whatever you teach, I mean, there's a lot of potential. This was Spanish 3 and 4, and the first time I did it, I really didn't know what I was doing as far as like the breakdown, because there's different ways. You can have all students working on the same type of a project theme. You can have individual themes. So I went with the individual, and I said, we can set aside like a period of time to work on it for like, say, a week or two. Or we can set aside a different day each week to work on it. And they decided they wanted Fridays to be like their PBL day. And so I let them choose. I kept checking in with them as they went. I told them I wasn't going to kind of like hover around them, because the idea was I wanted them to be more independent and kind of figure things out on their own. But having that ongoing kind of check-in, and the first year was like, it was a struggle a little bit, because I was giving them a lot of freedom, and I didn't know exactly how much like to give them and to like go in, like interrupt, or not interrupt, but kind of interact with them. But I wanted them to just figure it out on their own so I could learn from them. And the first like time we did this, I think we did like a period of 12 weeks. And some of the examples, like one student was working with like Modern United Nations, and she was really interested in history, and she chose to study about Latin American female presidents, and why has there been a rise or an increase in female presidents in South America. So then she kind of compared it to the United States. She created a pictochart, which infographic, and had like images, and she had graphs and interactive things where you could see percentages and different like breakdowns in terms of years and elections, and just she spoke about it. One student did an interesting one with flags, and basically said like if a flag could describe itself in one word, like what would the flag say about itself in the country? So not that you're going to find that answer in Google. You might find what the color symbolized, or if there's an actual symbol on it, but what would the flag say? And I thought that was kind of unique how she did that. Anybody use Padlet? So like in terms of product, pictochart, there was another pictochart. One student used Padlet, and she just put all of her information there. And she didn't actually read it. She gave it as a reference or resource, and we put them all on the Padlet, which is in the center, but then she just talked about it. And then she asked questions. She asked the classmates if they had questions, and there was just a conversation going back and forth. And the picture in the middle, if you look at it, they don't all look the same. I had students who chose to create, a poster board, and then to connect it, they took a picture of it and then just put it on the Padlet. But just to be able to go back and then present it in class and have that resource available. So when we did that first time, it went pretty well, and students were like, do we have to use technology? No. I said it can be whatever you feel that would be the best representation of what you learned. And I was kind of blown away by this one. When she brought it in, it was a book, like a notebook, And she had created like watercolors, and she was studying like the coffee. She was working in a coffee shop near our school. She was interested in traveling to like Spain and South America, very interested in the economy, and architecture was like all of her background, and so she was kind of like really invested in this. So she was looking at like the climate and the soil acidity to figure out like where would you have certain plants growing and what kind of products would those create. So if you look at the image on the left, can you see what she kind of drew, the shape? Anybody recognize it? How much you scan? It's South America, yeah. And so she has like pages, so she put the page number, and then the chart on the right, she had everything color coded. And when she presented, she stood in front of the room, she held the book, and she flipped through it and just gave an explanation of all of it. And it was so unique. It was not like the typical technology of some kind of like pick a chart or PowerPoint or Google Slides, but she just decided like this would be the best visual representation. And then she asked students in the class questions, and they had like the feedback going back and forth. But it was just a unique way. And for her, it was meaningful because, like I said, she was working in a coffee shop, and her boss, oh, and the other piece was I wanted them to kind of connect with somebody that was working in that area if they chose like a profession, if there was somebody who lived in a foreign country of like a student, if they could get that. But her boss was actually from, I think, Colombia, and so she was able to have like a conversation with him in Spanish and really learn about like how the coffee is produced, how they get to the store, and all of those other aspects, and then present it to our class. And so the initial picture that I showed you of my classroom changed to look more like this. Sorry. Which for some experiences, like the students would work together, but on the back wall, which I have a lot going on in my classroom because I like having a lot of student work, but on this bottom picture, the back cabinets, what I had the students do was write their essential question that they thought initially that they would pursue, and then we had like a kind of like a gallery walk. And they each had their piece of paper, they had their question, and then the other students had little post-it notes, and they just walked around, they read the question, and then they wrote down on the post-it note if other questions came to mind, like to kind of push the thinking. And so they were giving that feedback, and then the sideboard is kind of where we tracked like our class, like where we were, how many days, what projects we were working on, if anybody needed help, because for some of them, they were trying to evaluate like the peers, like what are the common things that teenagers experience in our country versus other countries. So they created like a Google survey, or they had other like a paper handout for students to fill in, and so storing everything over there where the students could go whenever they had class. Now one thing I'll add is the class that this worked with the second year, I had 17 students in one period. We run a 6-day rotation, and not all of the students could fit the Spanish every single day. And to compound that, it was levels 3, 4, and 5. So there were some days where I had, like 12 students in Spanish 3, 1 in Spanish 4, 2 in Spanish 5 for some mix. And I think there was only one day where they were all there together. So doing something like PBL worked really well because we had that space they could work in and kind of like that consistency. But it definitely was a challenge with scheduling that year, but we made it work by doing things like this. And also with the Padlet on the top right, another student was looking at the topic of tolerance, and she explored different countries, and we had a connection, which I'll tell you about. But for her, as she moved along, she was afraid that she would lose some of her thoughts. And so what she did is she recorded at different periods, like as she'd been working on it at home, she just recorded herself like thinking through what she had just been working on. And then she attached it to the Padlet. And as she presented in class later on in the year, she kind of referred to that. She would play through some of it for us. But she didn't, that was all of her information just on that one. She had her opinion, she had like a personal reflection, she had other resources, and then her ongoing like throughout the process, and then her next steps. And actually in October last year in Pittsburgh, there was a conference that we had, and I had a similar session to this, and I had her and another student present on it to teachers. And listening to them talk, like she even said, like it took me to the point where I didn't worry about the grade. I just wanted to know, like, what was I learning? What was my next step? Like, where could I go from there? It wasn't like an end point like in my other classes. And she really wishes that like more teachers would do the project-based learning and actually talk to some of her teachers about, could we maybe in chemistry do something? I think it's really neat to be able to explore what you want and kind of all share out. Accountability was a little bit of a challenge initially because like with the students, like I said, I didn't want to walk around every single time and like hover over them, but I wanted them to keep the conversation going. So for some of the tools that we use, like Voxer, anybody use Voxer? It's like a walkie-talkie messaging app, like the old school like walkie-talkie. It's an app on your phone, so it's like conversation. So students would share their question, or if they weren't sure about something in our group, they can ask questions to their peers. We also use things like Remind, Kid Blog for them to do some reflections, and then even Padlet, and also Edmodo. Anybody use Edmodo? No. Okay, so we used Edmodo for years, and that's actually a big component of how we took this to a global level. So when I started the second year, we kind of talked and like, what went well, what could be better, where do we go from here? Because it was just very basic since we were just getting started with it. We went through 3 different like phases of it. Students could continue to focus on the same topic, or they could work with another classmate on some topic they came up with together. But it worked really well, because like I said, for the class I did it with, there were 17 students on varying schedules, and so it was tough sometimes to keep track of where everybody was, but having that like flexibility where they were learning about something they chose, and they could check in with me on the days they weren't in class, worked really well. So we had to think about, like, I was like, where do I want to go from here? So we went to like the global level, and with Edmodo, I had gone out and I had spoken at EdmodoCon like the summer of I think 2017. And I was amazed at like how quickly you could connect with these other teachers around the world. And for years, I wanted to set up that connection. And we had tried a pen pal probably 3 years ago. And I remember the students sending the letter in December of, let's say, 2016, and they never got a response. And finally, the following January of, let's pretend like this year, the letter came back. It was never opened. It went to like 4 different countries in South America. The girl had graduated, and I don't know where it had been for like the 13 months prior to that. But, you know, lost, nobody ever read the message, there was no correlation and correspondence between them. But with Edmodo, what I did is there's different groups. So like you go on Facebook, you have different communities with educators. So there were 4 language teachers. I put a message and said, you know, in my classroom, we're going to do project-based learning. This is what we're looking to do. We want to have a connection with your students. I gave the age group, and that was pretty much it. The first day I had maybe 5 or 6 responses. 2 of them then decided not to because their students were a lot younger than mine, and they just figured like there wouldn't be the same kind of connection. My students were in the range of like 15 to 17, and the other ones were like 9 to 12. But I did find 3 groups in Mexico, Argentina, and Spain to kind of start a conversation with. So what I did is I set up a group on Edmodo. I set up a group on Edmodo, and the students kind of joined the class. So imagine like a Google Classroom if you use it, and you have all of the students in the classroom, and they can introduce themselves. So my students introduced themselves to the other students, and there were 3 teachers besides myself in this group. So all we did was have conversations. You know, this is who I am. This is where I live. These are my activities. And then that kind of progressed a little bit more. The students were starting to ask questions. So one student was like, what is it like as a child? Like, do you have like children's stories that are read to you? Do you wear uniforms in school? There were all these different conversations. And then I thought, you know what? Typing is kind of tedious sometimes. So we need something a little bit more, a way to communicate. So we use Flipgrid. Has anybody used Flipgrid? Which is now free for all educators from last year. So then I set up a Flipgrid with an introduction, and the students, and it's amazing because one of the schools, like Argentina, there was only an hour time difference. So we would be in class, and we would have a message pop up that said that, you know, we have a message. Let me see if it, I don't know if it'll open up to show you, but, all right. Okay, so these are some of the responses that we got. I won't play them, but like my students sent introductions. They walked around our school, and they sent it back to the other students. But they could see, like, what does their school look like? And they were amazed when we got the first video because the students were in uniforms. There was an open campus. They were outside. One of the students kind of walked over with his moped. Very interesting to actually see that. So had I not set that up, they wouldn't have had that interaction. But what was the best part of it was that when the students did that, they were able to actually see somebody after 2 months of connecting with them, just talking through the Edmodo setup. So it kind of looked like this. Then we took the Flipgrid, which that was the first time, and so the students were like just interacting, like, oh, that's who I've been talking with, or that's who's been giving me the information. And those students sent so many resources to mine, like links to videos, links to children's books, all kinds of things. They even set up their own separate group to kind of have a conversation. The other part, which I didn't anticipate, was like exchanging ideas about technology. So, I mean, we don't always know what it's like to be in a school or to be a teacher in another country, or even another state for that matter. But having that like one-to-one conversation with this teacher in Argentina, I understood like what it was like in terms of like their access. Like they'd only ever used Edmodo. They didn't really have reliable Wi-Fi or internet access. The students had to use their phones, which may or may not work. So that was kind of new to me, which had I not had this set out, like, I wouldn't necessarily know. Like I could read about it and think about it, but not actually have that conversation. And then seeing them and just seeing like how excited my students were to see the person they had been talking with, just took it to another level. And when the students did their first presentation that year, one of the students, her name is Leah, she got all this information. She was very interested in stereotypes for students. Like, what is it like to be a teenager? Because, you know, comparing here versus other states, what students experience there, but thinking about in, you know, Spanish-speaking countries, and in this case, Argentina. So she had really great conversations, bless you, with this young man, Santiago. And when she did her presentation, I don't even remember what she used for her, like on the screen, but she didn't even look at it. She just talked about it. And I remember sitting in the back of the room because I would sit back and just take notes. And she said, I was able to totally like craft and sculpt my PBL. Like there's no way I would have ever been able to learn any of this without having this connection. Like I could read books, I could look at videos, but until I was able to actually ask him specific questions, like what is it like to be in the school? Like what are some of the things you experience or struggle? She said totally made a difference. And when I heard that, you know, it wasn't me telling them, oh, it's going to make this huge difference. It was like their words coming, and as I'm writing, I was like, wow, like that's what we want. We want them to have that kind of connection and to see like how important it is to learn about other people. So that's what we set up with Edmodo first, and teaching the other teacher as well. So I had notes exchanged with her where she said like, I don't know if we're going to be able to do this. I'm sorry if we can't do the same thing as you. I was like, no, this is great. We're learning together, and then her students were also creating, which made it even better. So we did the Edmodo, we did the Flipgrid, which there's other tools, like I've been using, anybody ever use Recap? It's kind of like Flipgrid, but now they have Synth, which is a podcast, which we've also used this in our third year, but we also use Padlet, because then we figured you could do audio, you could put pictures, so whenever they would have different activities in their school, they would put up pictures on their screen, or on the Padlet, so my students could see. And there is nothing more like wow factor than whenever you have the Padlet open and somebody else that's not in your room is attaching something to it and you see it going on the screen. It's just really neat that you can be so far apart but connect in that space and exchange information. And Magdalena, who is the teacher in Argentina, she even said in this one message, you know, another issue is the internet. It doesn't work very well. Most of my students use their mobile, and she's very excited. So we've been like in this process now. This is the second year, and like as you'll see through the rest of this, it's really gone to another level. All of the involvement in getting other teachers, like even a friend of mine who teaches in Missouri, she has Spanish students. I think she only has 3. And so I involved her in this as well. So my students are learning about somebody in the middle of our country and also around the world. We're kind of interacting in the same space, which is a nice, safe space. Like we don't have to worry about them. Yeah.
So how do you monitor their conversations? Can you read all their conversations?
On Edmodo, and then on the Flipgrid as well.
Okay. And then do you have to give parents some sort of a form?
I did.
Would you be able to share that with us, or can we email you for it?
Yeah, I actually have that. It's at my school computer.
Okay.
But I'll add it when I get back tomorrow to the resources. Yeah. And I just typed it up and I said, you know, we're going to do project-based learning. I gave the link to the Buck Institute. I explained that we might be using these different tools. I explained what the tools were, and I had this, you know, for them to sign. And also to opt out, like they didn't want that. Because some of it is the video recording, and so of course, like showing the students their faces, but I did get all the permissions, and you know, and of course, like some of the students don't want, like some of them are like, oh yeah, we'll be on videos, and we're like, nope, just cover up the webcam, bless you. But yeah, I can definitely put that on there. I'll put that on there tomorrow. It should be on my other computer, but I know it is on there. But thanks for asking. Any other questions right now?
I have a question. For when they did like when they were talking to the other kids, like what language were they using?
Both.
Both. Okay.
Yeah, because and I left it up to them. I didn't want to say, you must speak in Spanish, you must. And the reason they did that is because, like, I mean, even as language teachers, if you've been teaching for a long time, like, there's still that comfort issue. Like, even how long, Spanish is not the first language I learned. I learned French in high school and college. And so I had that starting back in 1984. And so I've had that longer. But even having had that so long, when I speak with somebody in French, I still have that kind of like lack of confidence sometimes. And so for them too. So I left it up to them, and what they did was kind of a mix. And I said, well, why are you doing it that way? And they said, well, they need to learn English as well, and it's not just that they're speaking English, but they hear it and understand it. And so I said, okay, and that's what their students did as well. They spoke some in Spanish, some in English.
What level?
This was Spanish 3 and 4.
Okay.
Yeah, and 3 and 4. So they're like sophomores, juniors in my school, and this was like the first experience like that, being able to kind of interact. But yeah, I could moderate it. You know, the flip grid, like I always previewed it to make sure it was okay, and their teacher did as well. So it was kind of neat to see everything pop up.
So if I have just beginners, and I only have them once a week, which is not as much as I want to have them, can they have their screen up and then just translate and interpret what each other's saying and just keep it very basic sentences? Like, if the student writes to them and they don't know what it is, can they do that? Like, is that?
Yeah.
Because I haven't used Edmodo much.
It depends on what you use for it. So like when we did like the Padlet and they were writing like introductions, and you could comment. So like simultaneously, or not simultaneously, but pretty close. Like if they were on at the same time, they would type and they could add the comment, so you could see that. And sometimes they would ask in that, like I don't really know how to say this, or on Edmodo they would put it like in a mix of Spanish and English and kind of teach each other. Or sometimes they would just ask me, and I would like not give them the answer, kind of try and lead them into the answer a little bit, because that was like a bad habit I had. And how do you say? And I'd tell them, and I'm like, stop doing that, because it's not like helping them to learn it. They need to actually learn it, like find on their own, and then go from there. But yeah, that's a great question. Any other questions? So she was, I mean, I just put some of these screenshots in, like she was so excited to like dig in. Yeah.
How did you connect with the teacher that you worked
Through Edmodo. I put a message in the community and said, like, we're from this school, I'm teaching this level, we're doing project-based learning. I explained a little bit about it, and I said, is anybody interested in doing that? And then I had like, I think 5 or 6 responses initially.
Okay.
And then from those ones, some of them filtered out because the students were like too young. They were like 9 to 12 years old, and mine were like 14 to 17.
Sure.
And then just set up like what I hope to do. And honestly, when I first started, I just really anticipated just that communication on Edmodo, like the talking and that. I didn't think about these other parts, but then as we progressed, I'm like, oh, we should do this because it's available, and you can put like the Flipgrid right in Edmodo. I mean, I would set up in my classroom too for students to go and like record in the corner. They could use their phone or something. But it was like an ongoing, like, okay, now what? Now what? Because I wanted to keep adding more to it to see what would work.
Sure.
Yeah. So that was the Padlet. So then looking at their projects like the second time, I mean, all still very different. Some of the topics they did, like a lot of them were interested in tolerance. They were interested in like criminal things. I have students who are interested in like studying the law, medicine, looking at gender equality, like really deep concepts, like not just like the holidays and the customs. So from the first year to the second, the topics that they explored, and I don't know if that's because they aged, like they went from 10th to 11th grade in the process, in some cases juniors to seniors, and so things in their other classes, but they were then starting to connect their other courses with Spanish and trying to like really figure out something to study on their own. But it was very interesting for me because there's no way, like I don't cover all of this, like I have 42-minute periods, and when I don't see them every single day, like you're balancing all of these different topics that you have to cover. And so being able to like listen to them, and what we would do is they would present. So I'd have them sign up for a day, they would do the presentation. I had a form for Google form that they would do their own kind of self-assessment, and then I had their peers kind of do one, not for every single student, because I didn't want them to focus on like the form, but I wanted them to just give some assessment that I could read, and then we'd have conversations for that. But it was really big to have their reflections. And the other component, is anybody familiar with the SDGs? Yeah, anybody do you want to share anything about it? Not put you on the spot. Okay, so the United Nations has these SDGs, which are the Sustainable Development Goals, and there are 17 goals that are set up. If you go to the website, you can see all of them. So some of the topics, what I wanted the students to do was to find some real world issue. And then if you click on it, like for example, if I clicked on climate action for 13, it would take you to another page where it had different issues were going on in different parts of the world, how those countries were handling it, and then other resources students could explore. So for mine, a lot of the things that they were looking at were talking about like quality education, gender equality, reducing inequalities, and so I wanted them to find at least one, if not more, to kind of pursue and find out more information about, because like I want them to speak Spanish, but I also want them to be able to kind of take something else away from it. So preparing for the future, figuring out how to collaborate, how to find information, look into their community and see like what are problems that are happening in my own space, how are other countries dealing with that, or are they even problems? And I know that they've asked me questions that kind of really push my thinking, so I don't know all the answers. Like even standing up here now, I do not know all of the answers about PBL. I just know like what we've been working on kind of together, and what I've learned from them has just been like so far beyond what I even anticipated at the beginning. But this was something new to me in the second year, and seeing them like really like latch onto that, I guess, to say it, for lack of a better way to say it, and kind of teach each other. And some of them were doing like United Nations, Model UN. Anybody in school have the Model UN? Like my students will represent a country, and they have issues, and they'll debate and do all of these things. So they were like taking that, taking their other interests, thinking about college in some cases, learning the Spanish, and then trying to put all of that together in something that was like unique or authentic for them, and then sharing it with their classmates. And so then the other thing that we did, has anybody used Buncee? So Buncee is like, these are all the different tools. So Buncee is a presentation tool. It's kind of like if you were to create like a PowerPoint or Google Slides. The difference is it has all of these different images, icons, shapes, animations, you name it, very visual. And instead of adding like one image on the screen at a time, you could find like, seriously, they have bottle flipping, fidget spinners, dabbing dancers, Fortnite dancers. They keep adding all of these different really authentic, like this is what the kids are doing, plus real images that people take of pictures from around the world. You can put videos in, there's so much that you can do with it. So what I had my students do, like mid to the end of the year, was create a Buncee and kind of explain who they were. Just a very basic kind of review, introduce themselves in Spanish, and then we create, it kind of looks like a Padlet. Very similar concept, they call it a Buncee board. Easy to create. So if you look at them, I mean, you can probably figure out the ones doing like the animals, somebody's in the band, we got the sports, playing the guitar, and we shared that with the students in Argentina and also the students in Spain. Now, one thing that I kind of forgot initially was like, I think everybody goes to school at the same time as us, you know, August or September until June, and what happened was Southern Hemisphere, anybody know what happens at the school in the seasons?
Floods?
Yeah. So my students were like, oh, they're on summer break now, like in the, you know, December, January. I said, yeah, but some of the students still kept connected with mine and would respond. But she asked them, she said, you know what, I'm not gonna make you, like, you're on break, but if you want to keep that connection, and they did. So what mine did was they created the Buncees, I put them on there, and then I shared the link with Magdalena, and just told her, like, they created these Buncees, and so she said, I love them, and it's amazing, like, I've never used it, it's amazing how much we're learning with you and your students. And I was thinking the exact same thing, because what we had learned just from them in Argentina, that's who we worked with the longest, just sharing that and like figuring out who they were. And a funny thing too is like the Flipgrid, whenever we did the video, you know, the students in my school, like they're sitting, or it's kind of like a structured, and in their school, there was like a long table, they're leaning against the wall, they have a big thermos and mate. Anybody know what mate is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, and then the kids are like, what is in that big thermos? And like, why are they standing and why are they dressed like that in school? And just looking at that environment, like actually looking into it, being able to ask those questions and tie that in. But it was really neat to have that kind of like a window into their classrooms there as well, and also in Spain. So we created the Buncees, we shared it with them, and then at the end of the year, I finally got the Skype going. I had wanted to do that, but didn't. Anybody ever do Mystery Skype? Do you know what Mystery Skype is? Anybody want to tell besides me? Do it, do it. You get a prize. I have a prize for everybody. Yeah.
I remember doing, and this is what I remember from a couple of years ago at PNC. Mystery Skype is where you connect with somebody in a different location, usually a classroom, and you go back and forth asking yes or no questions to try to narrow down the location of where that other classroom is before they figure out where you are at.
Right. Yeah, and it's fun.
It is a lot of fun.
I've only done it, I did it one time in a Microsoft training, and I forget where the school was, but trying to come up with those yes or no questions, they're always trying to ask these like really complex questions, and I'm like, nope, you can't ask that. And it was with a school with younger students, and so they did figure out that we were in Pittsburgh, and I forget what somebody asked, and then the one kid's like, oh, it's Pittsburgh, and we're like, how do you even know that? But so that was the concept. Like you set it up, you can set it up in the Microsoft communities. You can Skype with experts. It's really neat that you can create that kind of like portal between you and some other classroom or another expert. But I set up just a Skype call, and we sat down with my computer in my classroom and a couple of the students kind of around it with her students and theirs. Now the connection was not all that great because like she said, like the internet issues, but it worked for a while, but being able to actually see them and like, for us, this was, I think, the end of May, and for them, you know, they were in the picture, they had like scarves and heavy jackets on, so my students were like, why are they dressed with all that heavy stuff? I said, because it's the winter, like it's the opposite. And then, I mean, you can see like kind of the smile on her face, and I was like, it was awesome. It was like the end of the year, and it just had been like steps along the way, like each thing just kind of added to it. And like I said, when I started, I just wanted to do like authentic PBL. I didn't anticipate any of these other aspects, but they just kind of like came to be along the process, which was kind of like what I wanted from the students, not telling them what to create at the end, just kind of figure it out as they went. So they had a conversation, and of course the tech didn't keep up, so the video kind of clicked out, but they were able to, they couldn't hear the audio actually, the video stayed, but then they just started typing. So that's when they were like, how do you say? And they were really shy about speaking to them, and they're looking at me, I said, just talk. It's okay. And she's like, well, I might make this mistake. I said, we make mistakes just speaking in English all the time, not just in Spanish. It happens. Like even as an adult, the other day, I said something, my friend laughed at me. I said, see, I said, we make mistakes. What happens? So that year, the second year, so those were the tools that we used. Our conversation, I kept like screenshots just because I wanted to refer back to it along the way. And for them, like she said, you know, thanks for letting us or helping us to practice English. And she said, it's a shame we don't have more time to collaborate with you. And I was thinking the same thing. But from the beginning of the year until the end, like our students connected. They had these like friends in Argentina, and then later on we added Spain, actually the beginning of this school year, and these different tools that we kind of shared with those students. So they went from just using Edmodo to using all these other things and having that interaction where like the teachers were kind of there and moderating it, so we were making sure that it was, you know, appropriate and the responses were something that should be shared. So then this year is year 3. So then again, I was like, well, what do we do from here? Now, most of those students that I had in that first and second year graduated, or there was not a level 6 in Spanish, and so I didn't have them anymore. And so I was really curious about what they could do besides like me teaching or not them just learning and opening up different things to share with peers. So thinking about all these questions, we added on some different components. And I don't know if like that's what Synth would look like. So if you used Recap before, the top 2, Synth is free, it's SYNTH, and if you go, it kind of, I'll say, it works similar to like other video response things that you would use, so you don't have to have the video. So if you just want students, or if you just want to share like an audio recording and just talk for conversation, it's a really great tool. Does anybody do podcasting in your classes at all? So like the way this works is you as a teacher could put like different questions as prompts. Record it, I think it's like 256 seconds. You can have the audio or the video or no video. You can upload a picture if you don't have a video. You can even add a link. Then if somebody wants to respond to it, they add a thread. And then what happens is, let's say you have 5 different questions. So in my case with the PBL, we could have students like, what are typical foods that you eat? What do people do, like teenagers do after school? And what kind of classes do you take? And 5 different topics. Then they could go through and add a thread and respond to it. You, as the teacher, whoever, could then open it up and just listen to that one, or if they're all kind of in the same theme, like the same podcast, you could listen to question 1, all of the answers, question 2, all of the answers, and it just kind of plays them through for you. It's amazing because it feels like you are just having this ongoing conversation back and forth. So we did that, I created one, and I really don't like being on video, which right now that doesn't matter, but I figure like if we're asking the students to do something like that, then we need to do it as well. And years ago, and this is kind of funny, is that I never really like, how many of you like professional development, like to be the one sharing out? Do you ever do that? Like, okay, we need somebody from this table to this table. How many of you do not like that? Yes. But yet we stand in the front, right? There is something, and I never understood. I'm like, why do I get so nervous? Like, even if you know ahead of time that you're going to speak, like I get that nervous feeling, like, and I've been asking students to do it for years, and they would say, can't we just like talk in our desks, or can't we just talk to you? And I'm like, no, just stand up there, like they're your classmates, what's the big deal? And it wasn't until probably 5 or 6 years ago, we had a PD session, and there was like 50 of our teachers in the library, and these 2 7th grade students came in, they had a PowerPoint project on the smartboard, and they stood in front of the teachers, and they presented on something they had done, like book trailers and things, I think, in their class. And I remember sitting in the middle of the library looking at them like, I can't believe they're standing up there and like, just don't look nervous at all, talking, asking questions, answering questions. And I thought, I I wouldn't even want to do that. Like, I had to do a presentation in front of the teachers at one point, and I was nervous about it for days. Like, I didn't like it, and I don't like public speaking. But when I saw them do it, it finally clicked to me, like, I've been asking them to do the same thing that I myself do not like to do. So I have to change that. Now, the difference is, whenever you're speaking about something you're excited about or passionate about, I think that makes a huge difference. So, standing up here, like, I love seeing what the students have done. I'm not an expert. It's just that I've done some of the, steps along the way, and I constantly am learning as I go. I make mistakes all the time, but seeing the benefits and hearing back from students and actually hearing them present, this is the first year for me being at P&C where I don't have students. The last 4, I think maybe 5 years, they've either been in the showcase or they've been like in my presentations and I'll have them speak. But last year was the first time that I just got out of the way and I let them do the whole session. And it's so much more powerful when you hear from the students. And in the spring last year, we had a PD session at my school, and the same group of students presented to our teachers. Now, I have been talking about different tools, with the teachers before, and it's different when you hear the students say, well, I like this because I can do this, or I like this because I can record my thoughts, or I feel comfortable talking. I don't feel comfortable talking in class, but I can use Flipgrid and record it and you can listen to it. So hearing that directly from them makes such a difference. But it wasn't until, like I said, when I saw them speak that I totally understood like that comfort level and decided, okay, if I want them to do a video to show like this is my classroom, this is my school, and they're on the video, which again, I make sure it's okay with the parents, then I should do it as well. And so I recorded, and then the top right is the teacher in Spain who then joined on this year. So now we have like Argentina, we have Spain, we had Mexico for a period of time, but at that period of time was when there were a lot of earthquakes in Central America, and their school was kind of affected by that, and so we lost contact with them along the way. But this past year we've had Argentina, my friend in Missouri, and Spain, and the students being able to hear the different accents, see the different classrooms, the interactions they have with their peers on screen was really unique. And who teaches Spanish? So do you teach like the Latin American Spanish, or do you teach like
Castilian, Spain.
Okay. You as well?
No, Latin American, Mexican.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when they hear it, and her accent was very thick, and it's, you get used to it, and they say, well, does everybody speak like that? I said, it's kind of like in English. Like, you can tell in the United States when somebody does not come from, like, your same town. Somebody in Chicago last year said, you're from Pittsburgh, aren't you? I said, yes, but how did you know? They said, well, you sound like it. And I said, I don't know that I sound like anything, but they were able to, I don't know if it was a good guess or what, but them listening to her speak, they were like, oh, it's so thick and I can't understand. And I said, well, you never know. If you go on to take Spanish in college, you may have a teacher who is from Spain, and they have a different accent, or even Argentina. My friend is from Argentina, and the way they say the double L is a little bit different. So understanding that, I cannot replicate all of the sounds. Like, the younger you are when you learn a language, you can form the sounds better. The older you get, not so much. And for me, I spent, 20 years of my life almost learning, probably 15, learning French before learning Spanish. And so that is a little more difficult for me than it is for the students that I'm teaching. But having that authentic piece where they're speaking and hearing it is so much better. And just being able to see. Now, when they recorded, we also were able to interact and see, like, oh, their internet is not as reliable as ours either. So that was a nice added feature to it to have that other group. Now, one other thing to add, so that all these different tools, and it's not about the tool, it's like, what does the tool do? It wasn't like, oh, I want to show this other school Bunsey, like, what are we sharing with them that we're using Bunsey for? But having them, create their own as well. And the next thing we did was Nearpod. How many of you have used Nearpod? So Nearpod, and this kind of came to me with the students, they were working in Spanish 4 on vocabulary about planning a trip. And so it doesn't matter if you use Spanish or not, but anything that you would use in your content area, if you're exploring different places around the world, geography, science, any of those concepts. And I wanted them to pretend like they were creating a trip, like, hey, come to Pittsburgh, from Argentina, come to Pittsburgh. What do they need to know? What could they expect to experience? And use all of the vocab in their chapter, like that theme, but then make like a personal, authentic experience for them to come to Pittsburgh. So I thought Nearpod would be a great way to do that, but the only problem was, like, the students could not collaborate in the same lesson. So I was like, okay, how do I do this? Do I create the account and then log in and let them kind of build it? And I thought, no, I want them to have that collaborative piece. So what we did is they created a Google presentation, they shared it, there were 4 of them, and then they each had a component. So they might have had like the travel arrangements and the lodging and broke it down. And they added their information into their Google Slides with pictures, with text, with whatever it was about coming to Pittsburgh. And then there's a Chrome extension. Does anybody know that? It's like a little Nearpod. You can Nearpodize your Google Slides. So if you click on it, let me minimize. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But on it, it's that little one where the cursor is. If you click on it, it pops up and has you log in. So if you have like a lot of presentations in Google Slides, and you can upload PowerPoint, but I got to thinking, oh, I can have them collaborate in the Google, and then have them totally push it into Nearpod, and then just log it in on the one extra computer I have in my classroom, and of course it's going kind of slow, so we'll just pretend it did it, and then have them add in different activities. So when they did that, they were able to add in, and that's what their presentation looked like. So all of the images that are on there was the Google Slides. Then what they added to it, the field trip, a draw, and a poll, they asked interactive questions for the students. So one of them was like, where would you like to stay? What is something you would like to do? What do you know about Pittsburgh was one of them. And then they had like 360 tours. You just search it, all within Nearpod, and thousands of them come up depending on where you want to go. You can find a ton. So Pittsburgh, there were a lot of them there. I think even Permanis was on there. Everyone knows Permanis. Wait, of course, they're Permanis. So they added all these things in, and then we shared it with the school in Argentina and also in Spain, and also Missouri. So then when their students did it, they were able to like look at it, like here's what Pittsburgh, like the VR part of the river field trips, right? And we were able to see their answers. And so being able to do that and actually feel like we brought them to Pittsburgh in a sense was another component to this. And so my students were creating like this trip using the vocab, making it more meaningful because they were like catering it to like these students in Argentina that they had met and known in some cases like for about the year or year and a half prior. A few of the students were new, so it was kind of a newer experience for them. So when they created that, we shared that with the students. They went through it, and then they did one for us in Argentina. Like they were just added bonuses to it. Let me go back. So after the summer break, when we came back to school, there was a Bunsy board about me that the students in Spain and Argentina created for my students. And one of them was like, oh, this is my daily boring life. I get up, I go to school. But it was like awesome to see that they took what we had shared with them and then sent it back to us. So learning about who we are and what it's like to be here in, a teenager in a school in Pittsburgh, and then sharing that with the different schools in Argentina and Spain. But then also adding on these different tech skills that the teachers and the students were learning and teaching each other. And I didn't anticipate that. Like when we got the Nearpod back, I was like, guess what? We got a Nearpod. And the kids were like, oh my gosh, they made us a Nearpod lesson. I said, yeah, and they were answering questions, looking at the images and places in Argentina, walking around the classroom and checking it out. So it was really unique to see like how it was kind of keep coming around over and over. Anybody have any experiences similar to that to share? That you did with PBL? I know some of you said you've done PBL, and I'm kind of giving you like a lot of information, like how we took it and kind of bridged it together. Don't be shy. All right. Yeah, thanks.
I can't remember because it was like 6 years ago, but when I taught ESL, I had all different levels, and we used project-based learning to help them kind of grasp the language better. So I believe it was about their culture and what their country was, and then they had to explain it in English, and so it was pretty diversified, but it was definitely more of a template. But the idea of it was project based. So everyone was different, and then they did poetry on an app. There was an instant poetry app or something, and then they wrote a poem about their country, and we printed it and made a book. But it started out as one same idea, and then they went in different directions with it.
I like that. Did the students really like that?
Yeah, when they shared their poetry, it was amazing because we learned so much about them visually, and there was 10 countries in my class, so that was really awesome.
Yeah, that is the other added component. Is I know you had your hand up. It's like being able to see what they explore and then having different conversations with them that are different than just like the content that you're teaching. Like, oh, you're interested in like crime or the law or the economy, like what? And then finding out, well, I'm thinking about studying this in college, or I'd like to get a job doing this, or I see this problem here, I'm curious about what it is there, and I was like, okay. So you learn about them too and the relationships that are so important. Yeah.
I don't know if you consider this project-based, but I created a hyperdoc for reflexive verbs, and the kids, I just gave it to them. They had to explore on their own and learn about it, and we would check back in periodically, and they had to use Flipgrid to create their morning routine, and then they had to share it on Padlet. And then another assignment was the students had to watch their videos and then they had to ask someone a question in Spanish about their video, about their routine. Some kids were asking, what shampoo do you use? What do you eat for breakfast? What's your cat's name? You know, and then they had to respond. And so they were sharing and collaborating on the Padlet about their morning routines.
Wow, I love that idea. Like
Yeah.
that, like,
And then
kind of like retelling.
while I'm away right now, the kids in Spanish 4 or 5, we read 3 poems, and I'm not like really good at teaching poetry. So I gave each group a poem that we read, and they had to, when I go back, I'm just letting them go with it because it was just an idea that I had, to explain the poem to everyone else through like a dramatization or acting it out, making it come alive in the classroom instead of just reading it.
Right.
So we'll see what they do.
Yeah, and that's like the nice thing. It's uncomfortable too if you give them that like just go, but
Yeah.
like you never know until you try it, and it might not go. Like I didn't know if it was gonna work, and you know, there were struggles along the way, but like you never know until you try it. And if you make a mistake, you're like, okay, well, what can I do differently to like come to a different result? I like that idea. I can borrow that one. Like, I have used HyperDocs, I just haven't gone back. There's so many things to do to try.
Yeah.
And
The overhead goal seems to be that you're getting them out there. They're not leaving their classroom, but they're discovering other cultures.
right.
And it seems like it's taken off. So that's, I mean, it's successful because of that.
Yeah, and it takes planning and stuff, and but I do like the getting out of the classroom, because like I would love to take them to Spain, because they say, can we go to Spain? I'm like, oh yeah, but like I can't like physically take you, but being able to at least have those interactions and talk to somebody, see the video, or not the videos, the virtual field trips, and like look around that space made it so much different. But I'm not surprised. I wish it had not taken me so long to figure out that I wasn't actually doing PBL like I thought. But it's been so great in my classroom to have that component added into it, because trying to fit in culture and different things and doing the grammar and all the things that they need, like there's too much, and it's better if I think the students are creating a lot of that and have that ownership in it, and then teaching me, because like I always have something I want to learn, and when they come back and tell me all of these facts, like I'm back there taking notes. I have notebooks full of things and what they said. So in terms of resource, and I don't want to forget about this. This is where I started. The first one I did, I went to the Buck Institute, which now is PBL Works, but they had like rubrics, they had assessment, they had feedback, they had a project planning template, so many things that you can download and use. And I did print out like the essential elements. It has like them listed by number, a description, and it has even check boxes, like a yes or no and like a question mark. So you can give it to students and say like, my question is an essential question. It has it defined, and then they can go, well, you know, I don't know if it is. It also has like the full link, or not link, it has other links within it. You can go to other templates based on your grade level and content area. I think it breaks it down too. And a lot of visual things you can print out. Project-Based Learning is a book written by Susie Boss. It is an ISTE book. I think it's reinventing project-based learning, and I know if it's not already out, there is a newer edition coming out. It's a pretty hefty manual, but it goes through all of the parts of it and really explains it. So I spent a lot of time that summer reading that. I also read the book Hacking Project-Based Learning by Ross Cooper and Eric Murphy. Has anybody read that book? Yeah, and so that was very helpful. And actually, when Ross and Aaron were at PNC, I think it was 2 years ago now, I brought the group of students, and they were the ones that had done the presentation. And before we came, we had like a Google Hangout or a Skype, and my students were pitching their essential questions to Ross. And one of them was like, she presented hers, and I said, well, what is like your essential question? Like, why do you want to know that? How is that different than? And helped her kind of think through it. So that was really neat. And then when they actually met them here, for real, my students were like, wow, like that's them, they wrote this book. That's pretty neat that, you know, we get to meet them. Another one is Pure Genius. Does anybody know Don Wettrick? He has, he's in Noblestown, I think, Indiana, and he has like a startup ed podcast. He had a course he started, like an innovation course, where students are basically doing the project-based learning, design thinking. He's been traveling around the country. The students are becoming like really innovative in his classroom, but it's a great book, and so that's another one that gives you some ideas. And they're not all necessarily project-based learning. There's like inquiry-based learning, problem-based learning, design thinking. And then the last one, Dive into Inquiry, is by Trevor McKenzie. So I kind of read through those. I looked at different blogs. I mean, there's always information on like getting smart. And there's like Google alerts that you can get if you want to focus on project-based learning. Probably 2 or 3 times a day, I get an email with like articles that relate to PBL that's like throughout the world. There's some really awesome things that are going on. And it's good to read just to get some ideas of how you can start it in your classroom. But I am not an expert. I mean, what worked for me may not necessarily work for you. Or you might be thinking like, oh, that would never work in my classroom, or I wouldn't do it that way. And that's true. Even this year, trying to do the same thing that I did last year, I realized that I can't. The students are not the same. They don't have the same interests, so I have to kind of like work around that. And I don't have as many either. I think I only have like 10 students this year actually doing the PBL. So we haven't even done the first one yet. We got to like start with the scheduling, but it's an ongoing like work in progress is what I say. Anybody have questions? I know that's a lot. Yeah.
I made an Edmodo account while you were talking because I forgot I made one a few years ago, and I'm kind of not sure. I know you talked about Edmodo, but as a beginner,
Yeah.
once you make an account, you make a little profile about yourself, and then do you search for what you're looking for, or do people find you?
You might have people find you. That has happened to me. Like somebody makes a connection. Like it might pop up like people you may know. But you can create a class and have students join it, or you can look and explore communities based on what you teach, like world languages, high school, there's like science, social studies, technology, and so forth.
Alright, cool.
Before anybody leaves, I have like a ton of like items up here. I got pop sockets from Nearpod, I got light bulb, flashlight, like just different things. So if you would like something, come on up. If you have questions, my contact information it's online, but I'll just get back to this. Like send me an email, send me a message on Twitter. I will get back to you. If I have something, if I don't know the answer, I will find it or find a resource for you. If I have something I can share with you, I would gladly do that in a form. I will put that on there tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will not forget.
Okay, and then I just go to that. I go to your website.
Yeah, that is where I've actually written about some of the PBL experiences. So like that's my blog. So I just kind of share out what we've done. And I did.
So where would the form be then?
Oh, I'll upload it onto the P&C, like where they hand handouts. Okay. Yeah, I'll do that tomorrow from my school computer. Hopefully it logs on. Usually it logs me out. But if you have any questions, let me know. If I said something you're like, yeah, this is not right, please tell me. Because my students tell me, they used to like do tally marks on the board. Yep, made a mistake, made a mistake. I said, you're going to be there for a long time. I make like thousands a day. So just keep going. So, well, thank you. Have a good lunch.
Thank you.
Right. Safe travels when you're leaving. Thank you. Come get some stuff.
Did you get to the vendor show at all yesterday?
I'm not letting around. I think my bag
Oh,
lost
wow,
out.
we have time to kill until it's 12:30.
I like to knock somebody over. Yeah, there's a monthly pen, pop sock, cheap rubber credit cards on that. There's stickers, there's buns and stickers. Oh, thank you. Just take one thing. I mean, this it's not going back to Pittsburgh. Well, that's easier when I'm like flying. Hi.
Hi, Oakland for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in Verona.
Did you?
Yeah,
Oh, I was just gonna say you go to. Okay.
I still work part time at Dollar Tree.
Oh, do you